So, today, your presenters for webinar number 3. We have in the room here in 190 High Holborn in London, James Emmett, our Director of Strategic Partnerships, Gary Tovey, our Stakeholder Relations Manager, and myself, Neil Ingo, a rather unimportant marketing manager. And on the line, we have 2 guest presenters today. We're very pleased to welcome David Corke, Director of Education and Skills Policy from the Association of Colleges, and Mike Townsend, Employment and Skills Advisor from Birmingham Metropolitan College. We said at the outset of this series we didn't want to make them just the same Pearson voices talking about the same Pearson messages, and today we honour that promise. So welcome to you both. Today's schedule, we're going to talk through the evolving landscape of apprenticeship reform and the work-based learning sector before moving on to look in more detail at what this means to colleges and providers. And then our 2 guests, David and Mike, will in turn look at how colleges could, should and indeed are responding to the opportunity before looking back at what kind of support is going to be made available to providers as part of this transition. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to hand you over to our main presenter for today, which is going to be Gary Tovey. Gary, controls coming across to you now.
Thank you very much for joining us. I won't take up too much time because it's fantastic, as Neil said, that we've got 2 external presenters with us today, and I want to make sure you have an opportunity to hear their viewpoint rather than just my voice and James's as well. But before we do hand over, just to really give some context really and start to explore some of the opportunities that the greater involvement of employers in apprenticeships, and yes, employers have always been involved with apprenticeships, but I think their involvement and the importance of that involvement is even more so now. So we're just going to go through those opportunities, but also just set a little bit of context before we do, how the landscape is changing and how there is really a greater sense of ownership by employers. So to summarise, and we'll go into some more detail on some of these, although particularly with the overall changes that you can see on the slides in front of you on learning models, institutions and funding, I think it is worth pointing out that our previous 3 webinars have covered these areas in a lot more detail, and they are available on the website with full recordings and slide decks as well. But in terms of what's changing and then how that involves employers and how that creates both opportunities and understandably some challenges, as any reform and any sort of change does for your businesses. So with the learning model changing of what an apprenticeship contains, different outcomes, different type of pedagogy, that has been driven very much by the design of new occupational standards and assessment plans by employers. Now this has been through trailblazer employer groups. It's been made up of large employers and a relatively good smattering of SMEs as well. And the key difference between the current frameworks that you may love or hate is that whilst those did involve employer input and engagement, they were at a much higher level and at a much more sector level rather than the new occupational standards and assessment plans that are by individual occupational roles or job roles. Employers are also going to be a lot more involved in the governance and in the delivery as well as that design that I've just talked about. And a lot of that will centre around who delivers the apprenticeship, who decides who will deliver that apprenticeship, and also how those occupational standards and assessments will be designed moving forward. And principally, the main institution that is employer-led and that will involve employers to capture all of that is the Institute for Apprenticeships, and I will come on in a little bit more detail around the IFA shortly. That is an employer-led body that will ensure that both the design, the certification and the quality assurance of apprenticeships is all in one place and is meeting the needs of employers and what they need from the apprenticeship and skills system. We've also got a huge amount of change happening with the way that apprenticeships are funded. I think it's fair to say that there is a greater ownership of funding for employers. That was clearly outlined in the Richard Review, which kick-started all of this reform in the first place. And more information has recently been released, and again I'll cover that in a little bit more detail in a moment, around how employers will own, how they will be able to procure, and how they will have to contribute, depending on their size, to the funding for apprenticeships. And I guess underpinning particularly the institutions, but also the funding, is the launch of the digital apprenticeship service. And this will be the online system, in effect, the online bank account, if you will, that employers of all sizes eventually will use to procure and manage their apprenticeship provision. And again, a little bit more information on that coming up shortly. Just in terms of some further context, and I don't intend to dwell particularly long on this slide, but just again to reiterate the changes that we're going through. So we as different partners in the sector are all going through this change, and it will mean slightly different things to each of us, of course. You know, if you are a provider or a college, it's about changing your delivery model and your pedagogy. If it is an employer, it's changing the way in which perhaps you decide on the apprenticeships that you wish to have delivered in your business, or certainly the makeup and the input from a training and talent perspective as well. So on the left there we have those SACE frameworks. As I said previously, employers were involved, but much more at a sector level, and those of you that have been around long enough will remember the work that sector skills councillors particularly used to play in the defining of frameworks, and some obviously still do. But on the right hand side is really what we're dealing with, and where those opportunities that James and myself will talk about is really starting to emerge. Apprenticeship standards have a slightly different makeup, and you can see that. I won't read through all of that, but I will just point out a couple of key bits, particularly around the formal assessment of behaviours during the on the job and off the job training, or the on programme part of the apprenticeship. That is the behaviours that have been defined by each of the trailblazer employer groups that are relevant for an occupation, or certainly for their sector, because of course there is naturally crossover, although that crossover will be determined by the depth of role and the level of role as well. We also now have this stage of gateway, and again my colleague Cheryl Woods talked a lot more about this in our second Insight webinar, but the gateway where the employer and the provider sign off the learner ready for the next stage, which is endpoint assessment. There's been some great best practice seen across apprenticeships in the past, where the employer has been fully embedded and fully engaged with the learner journey on their apprenticeship. But of course there is always a flip side to that, and there are numerous cases, and I'm sure you're aware of them, where the employer hasn't been quite as engaged. This gateway process really embeds and cements the employer into the learner journey and into that gateway process, because it's only through that joined up sign-off and agreement that a learner can move through to endpoint assessment and continue on their journey of their apprenticeship. And then just a little bit more detail, really, from the slide, a couple of slides ago, in terms of employers' involvement. So as I say, employers, large and SMEs, have designed standards to meet future skills requirements for occupations, and that was absolutely one of the key things that Doug Richard set out in his review, that these have to meet the future skills as well as the skills that we have here today. Primarily, when you look at the trailblazer employer groups that have come together, they have been the large employers, as you would expect, because they have the greatest resource and time to be able to give to that. But there is a clear consultation process that has been in place from pretty much early on to ensure that SMEs do have a voice in this area, and I think generally speaking that has been relatively successful, although of course there are some sectors in which that's been more successful than not. But I think what's really critical is the employer's involvement in designing standards from the very beginning. It is only through the expressions of interest submitted to the Department for Education from employers, not from perhaps other stakeholders, as has been in the past with framework development, it's only through those EOIs from employers that those standards have then moved on to the development stage. There has to be a genuine need amongst employers and amongst each individual sector for these standards to be developed on an occupation by occupation basis. The Trailblazer employer groups have then gone through the process and continue to do so across to develop the standard, usually a 2-page standard outlining what the occupation is and what the key knowledge, skills and behaviours are expected in that job role for the apprenticeship, and that then goes through a sign-off process currently with the department, but certainly in the future that will sit with the Institute for Apprenticeships, headed, as I said, by employers, so again almost signed off by employers' own peers. Employers then develop an assessment plan, although I am seeing examples where standards being developed and assessment plans are running concurrently to save time and duplication. And that assessment plan then enables the definition of what the endpoint assessment will look like post-gateway for all apprentices, irrespective of the employer that they work for. There is a large number of standards that has already been developed. They are available on the .gov.uk website, and they will continue to be developed because it's very much key that there are standards that cover a multitude of occupations. There may be over time some review of those and make sure that there isn't a proliferation for the sake of proliferation, but certainly there are obviously a large number. In terms of delivery, again, it's all about employers being in the driving seat. They will use systems such as the digital apprenticeship service to procure the training for on-programme and the endpoint assessment that they require. And they will also be able to view and use their funding to pay for apprenticeship training and assessment as well. This is a particular change in terms of procurement, and I know that James will probably touch on that a little bit more in terms of new business models and opportunities that presents. Employer engagement is something that I think all of us in all our organisations talk a lot about, and it absolutely remains critical, particularly because of this change to employers very much being in the driving seat. There's going to be mandatory employer contributions, and I'll come on to that again when I talk about funding briefly. Then that will differ between a levy-paying employer and a SME employer. But again, through that being mandatory, there is an anticipation that there will be greater buy-in and greater engagement from employers because they are spending their own hard cash. There's also an opportunity and a need to ensure that employers who are already delivering apprenticeships or you are supporting in the delivery of apprenticeships are supported through that transition from frameworks to standards. And equally, not just driven by the levy, because a lot of levy payers are new to apprenticeships, but also the general employer population. Apprenticeships will be new, standards will be new, and the whole system will be new. And so there really is an opportunity here, and perhaps I have heard it said, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to engage a whole new set of employers into the benefits of apprenticeships for learners. And I would add in a bracket to that, of course, that same once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to engage with parents and learners as well. There is also the impact of the government's post-16 skills plan, the Sainsbury review, or the response to the Sainsbury review, I should say, which again heralds a greater involvement by employers in linking the technical and professional education routes, and we'll see a similar model of ensuring that employers are at the heart of defining what qualifications and learning programs look like for the post-16 arena moving forward. So there is an opportunity there, I believe, and we believe at Pearson, to certainly link that, because the two are going to continue to merge much more, and I think the days of the sort of the academic and technical and the vocational not being together are relatively numbered. So moving on to what we believe some of this means for you. Firstly, funding, I think, is an important one, because it's something that drives us all and helps sustain our businesses. So funding will be channeled to the employer, not the provider, and that is particularly true in the long term, and I'll come on to some timescales there. The first kind of piece of that jigsaw is that the large employers will self-fund through the levy mechanism beginning in April 2017, and then small employers will receive increased support and they will be expected to contribute in a mandatory way, in a cash way rather than in kind or any other way that may have been done. A note of caution here, because a lot is talked about the levy, and of course it is an important policy position and change, but I do remind everyone that it is only 2% of UK employers paying 0.5% of their pay bill over £3 million, and so it's really important that we don't all just race to the top. We also need to make sure that we meet the needs of SME employers moving forward. So there are quite a few changes going on with funding that will affect the way that employers interact with you as providers, colleges and businesses. I'm not going to spend any time on the left. That is pretty much the current situation as we speak today, in terms of how frameworks are funded and how standards that have been released are funded in the current pilot. What is changing after the levy is introduced and in April and May is the way that apprenticeships across the piece will be funded. So levy payers will contribute 100% through their levy, and the government will then top up 10%. So whatever the levy payer's contribution, the government will top that up 10%. And once a levy payer has spent all of their levy money, the employers will use the same model as non-levy payers. And that model is that the government will effectively contribute 90% of apprenticeship funding for SMEs, and they will then, the employer will have to contribute 10%. That contribution in terms of funding flow will be paid to a lead provider according to agreed schedule and SFA contract as currently, until all employers move to the digital apprenticeship service from somewhere between 2018 at the earliest and 2020 at the latest. Levy payers, however, will start to use DAS from the inception of the levy. I think it's quite sensible that they're focusing on one group first to make sure that works and they get that right. There is, from April, there will be 15 funding caps, which will apply to both standards and frameworks. So it's worth also making sure that the employers you work with are aware of the frameworks and standards that are about to come into play next year. And then just a couple of other opportunities really in terms of funding, in addition to the 2% levy club, as I like to call them, or the SME market. I just highlight again that levy payers will be looking at the way they can spend their levy money. Not all of them will, but they will move to that different funding model if they spend all their levy. And there will be employers who may wish to enter onto the register of apprenticeship training providers as employer providers as well. And some may want to do that wholly on their own, but some will probably be looking for partners to do that as well. In the essence of time, and just to explain a little bit more about the Eyefi, and I think it's just important again just to highlight that employer engagement and employer involvement. The Eyefi will be chaired and led by employers. It will be responsible for the governance, for standards, EOIs, quality, certification, and possibly a couple of other things in grey there, but that's to be confirmed. So again, employers will be absolutely the driving seat of this governance moving forward. And we've also got then the digital apprenticeship service launching in April 2017 as well. I'll hand over to James to talk a little bit more.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Okay. Okay, all set of the slides. They should be coming through now. Excellent. All good, Neil? Brilliant, thank you. So apologies there for that slight delay as we had to move some of the slides across one of the machines. Okay, just to focus back then on the opportunity and how providers and colleges are already and will be increasingly in the future responding to the opportunity that reforms have, are and will present. Essentially what we've described here and our observations from what we see happening amongst providers and amongst further education colleges focus on three key areas, so engagement, delivery and assessment. So just to briefly look at what we perhaps mean in the context of engagement, delivery and assessment. Some of this has come out of, and you will recognise this from within what Gary has also described. But there are, under engagement, there are clearly opportunities when it comes to how you as providers engage with not just large employers but also the SMEs, and particularly with the ambitions here that there are with the reforms to increase SME engagement with the apprenticeship opportunities and new standards and those opportunities that are being presented to them. But that may not be in isolation. That could be in partnership. It doesn't necessarily, and what we're seeing are innovative ways in which providers, colleges and others are beginning to talk and discuss ways in which they can work collectively to engage the opportunities. And that may particularly be led where there may be specialisms, or there may be niches, or there may be opportunities to work together where facilities, services and expertise may differ amongst those providers. Clearly, the employer contribution presents both an opportunity from the point of view of the levy-paying employers and how those levy-paying employers will be spending their contribution, which is significant. But equally, as Gary was describing, how those employers who are contributing a levy may also look to influence how that levy could be spent. And we're seeing this in some scenarios where supply chains may benefit from a particularly large levy which is being provided by an employer, and how they want to see that levy being driven into their supply chain to maximise those opportunities, particularly where there will be SMEs and large numbers of SMEs in that supply chain. Priority sectors. So you all have localised national regional intelligence on not just priority sectors, but actually more granular level of a detail which is emerging. In some regions this is driven by the local enterprise partnerships and the labour market insight and intelligence which they are increasingly providing, feeding out into local learner provider networks or at local FE associations. But again, how can that be interpreted? How can that support your engagement strategy as part of your business model? And clearly as Gary defined, as transition from SACE to new standards. How can that be used as an opportunity to support those employers as they do transition to the new world and new standards? On delivery, of course, on programme, critical here. So where there are qualifications being delivered as part of the programme, but equally, as we are seeing in some cases, where there is non-qual provision as part of the on-programme offer, how can you benefit from that? What provision do you have? Who do you partner with? How do you engage with the likes of Pearson to ensure that you have the content and the qualifications in place to support the delivery of those standards? Endpoint assessment, I'll come on to shortly. Partnerships we've touched on. Partnership could be for on-programme, but equally partnership could form part of the EPA, the endpoint assessment as well. And again, we've mentioned transition. Transition in a number of ways, not just transition from the SACE framework, but to the new standards in the new world. And that transition is happening now. There will be, in your areas, in your regions, and in your sectors where you currently engage, there will be employers who are transitioning now onto the new standards, who will have apprentices enrolled. Historically, over the last 15 or so months, there will be apprentices. There are apprentices who are on the new standards. But equally, it's transition to the new world of funding. So how are you interpreting that funding to support the employers, large and small, particularly the small, to help them navigate through that funding opportunity, minefield? It can be interpreted in a number of ways. And then finally, assessments. You know, this is the, although the concept of assessment in an apprenticeship is not new, but the way in which the assessment plan is being defined and the endpoint assessment is positioned as part of new apprenticeships is new. But that does lead to an opportunity, not just in terms of a potential role for yourselves as part of endpoint assessment, but again, where are you gaining and supporting and bringing in specialist support, product service, assessment tools, etc., quality assurance that will assist you in delivering that endpoint assessment. So clearly, under responding to the opportunity, under engagement, delivery and assessment, there are a number of opportunities, partly linked to transition, partly linked to information and knowledge and how that is packaged up and presented and articulated to your existing and potential new customers in a way in which you can support them in that transition to or engagement in the new standards. Okay. Okay, Neil.
Okay, thanks very much, James. So now we come to the point where we hand over to our first guest presenter, David Corke. So David, I'm going to unmute you, mute your mic. Are you there?
Hello.
Hello, David.
Hello.
Okay, I'm going to hand over control to you now. 2 seconds.
Hopefully everybody can see my screen.
Yeah, we can see it.
Brilliant. So I have two very simple slides for you. The first slide, I just wanted to cover the big, what I think is the big opportunity. So firstly, technical and professional education in the round has been raised as a priority, and that including apprenticeships, of course, but like with the study programme agenda, the direction of travel is what's really important, and I think the devil is in the detail, and we'll have to continue to work at trying to implement the policy the best that we can. So that the main point here is, how do all of the reforms that are happening interlock along with one another, and how do they work alongside one another? So I think some of the key considerations that colleges are dealing with at the moment is the culture and ethos with regards to apprenticeships, and I mean that in the widest sense. Are apprenticeships in the forefront of people's minds? When's a programme best delivered by an apprenticeship, and when's it best delivered by a classroom mode of delivery? Do institutions have the appropriate apprenticeship model or vehicle? Are we looking at decentralised provision within an institution, or centralised provision, or a completely different delivery vehicle or model altogether? Do we have the appropriate staffing structures, including the appropriate governance in place to deliver all of the reforms, and we're making sure that those are in place. In terms of commerciality and sustainability going forward, I think with the reforms and the proposed flattening of the rates, one thing that we need to be thinking about is those areas that have previously attracted younger people into the programmes, and making sure that we are able to deliver programmes that they want and need, but also are sustainable and viable in the long term. We need to make sure that we continue to make really good use of labour market intelligence, and making sure that it continues to inform curriculum design. I think with particular regard to the skills plan, we need to make sure that the alignment of the classroom-based offer is perfectly in line with the apprenticeship offer that a college has in place, and that people are smoothly from one route and one programme to the next. I think it's really important that employers continue to have an influence on the whole college offer, not just the work-based learning offer, and also with regards to communication, that is communicated effectively to all stakeholders, with employers being at the forefront of that. So I think those are the key considerations for me, and obviously can now hand over to Mike and take questions at the end.
Okay, thanks very much for that, David. We'll be back with David Corke at the Q&A session at the end. I'm now going to go to our second guest presenter today, who is Mike Townsend. Mike, can you hear me?
Yes, can do.
Okay, I'm going to hand over control to you now.
Okay, thanks. Is that fine? Everybody see it, yeah?
Yep.
Yeah,
we're all good.
We're all good, okay. My name's Mike Townsend. I'm an Employment and Skills Advisor at Birmingham Metropolitan College. Primarily my role within the organisation is engaging with organisations, predominantly in engineering, manufacturing and construction skills, and engaging with them to develop apprenticeship programs. I think the situation we found ourselves in with some of our clients a few years ago is, if we looked at some of our key apprenticeship groups in engineering, we cross-sliced them groups and looked that they were all following a similar SASE framework, and when we actually cross-sliced that group, we found that we had nearly 6 different sectors that were utilising that framework of food and drink, automotive, aerospace, petrochemical, some electrical, rail. So really we found ourselves in a situation when trailblazers are being developed where, you know, how are we going to deliver the same number of programs to potentially 4 or 5 different trailblazers? So really, with some of our key clients now, 2 years on, we've really started 4 main trailblazers or new standard development across our employer base, and really just wanted to share some of that with you. That, you know, if we look at our BMW Group Oxford, we commenced our first new standard with them in September 2014. So we were invited by BMW Group Oxford to develop their training centre down in Oxford, and that came out of the automotive group of employers, and that was around mechatronics and product design standards. So essentially what we delivered to them previously on a SASE framework, but very much, rather than having that kind of square peg into a round hole, that very much we had standards then that were round holes and round pegs into them. And really the learning curve from that was that when we started that in 2014 and we started the new program is very much, we were starting on a program where the end point was not yet decided. So actually the learning curve we got from that program and actually starting a program really allowed us to develop that further into a similar, from the automotive group, to deliver a mechatronics and machining at their Hams Hall plant. Now this very much different to models. The BMW Group Oxford model allowed very much, they had their own training school, and we sent staff down from Birmingham, we employed staff locally to deliver that automotive group mechatronics and product design. The BMW Group Hams Hall was a different model because they came into college for a day, so we're very much responding to the different models that the organisations want. A lot of the standards within the automotive group were still evolving when we started them. Therefore, we started on standards that were still evolving. And when you look at the machining group, that actually still evolving as we were going on through delivery. So very much, when we started these new standards, the future was a little bit unknown when you're looking across a 2, 3, maybe 4-year program, that you were moving forward. And that's where you've got to develop your strong relationship with the company, that they understand that maybe year 2 will look different than you thought year 2 looked when you started year 1. Sorry if that sounds a bit confusing. But what we've also done from cross-slicing that group, we've now developed an apprenticeship in rail with London Midland, and that's rail engineering technician. Now, we realised as an organisation when we engaged with London Midland that we weren't going to be able to deliver a lot of the rail-specific units and training included within that new standard. So we went about with the employer to engage with NTAR, which is a National Training Academy down in Northampton, to develop that apprenticeship that involves some generic training that they will do at Birmingham Metropolitan College, but then they will, as part of their apprenticeship standard programme, go down and spend time with NTAR and do their rail specific. And what we're looking at there is shared delivery. We're not looking at a subcontract deal where we subcontract that training off. It's all part of the commitment statement that we put together with this particular standard. And recently, we've just, well, recently as in Monday, we started our first cohort of learners on a food and drink group engineering maintenance, which again follows a completely different model to the other ones, whereas the food and drink companies we engaged with said that actually they preferred a block release, model to a day release or a 1 year off the job. So very much it was responding to the needs of that employer. So with that particular apprenticeship, they will do 3 6-week blocks in 3 years of their apprenticeship, with a block in the end in the 4th year that will be getting them ready for their endpoint assessment. So we actively try to engage with a number of different sectors to try and reduce the impact of them being all on different standards. The key messages I would give in regards to that is about employer partnership and development approach. Is very much with all of the employers I've just mentioned there that we've developed, it very much has been the common goal is to move towards achieving that standard and the best possible training delivered within it. From a college point of view, having robust costing models, because with the onset of Levy and with all these different programs, is being able to make sure that you can make your contributions toward at the end of it, and not whereas we've all had our funding rates decided by us on a SASI framework, is very much that cap may well be 27,000, but the employer might not want to pay that much. Also, if you're looking at some of your employers you work with or areas you want to put for growth, is considering delivery partners like we did with the National Training Academy for Rail, because in doing that you are opening out your offer to employers. So we're doing that we're looking to do that on other trailblazers we're currently looking to develop at the moment. Also, National Skills Academy membership and contact is how we engaged a number of employers in our food and drink bid. So we actually engaged with the National Skills Academy, who signposted a lot of companies towards us, and we actually went through an expression of interest to actually become an approved provider for the National Skills Academy. So they also, and as part of that, they streamed their employers through us as a regional centre for delivery for that particular new standard. When we look at levy engagement, I mean, a lot of different releases have come from the SFA, from the CBI, obviously Pearson as well, and Pearson came up to Birmingham to go through levy engagement with us. Is very much that employer partnership and development approach again. So very much when you're looking at your new standards and you're delivering that partnership, you're very much doing that with your levy. Also, information, advice and guidance sessions have gone down very well with a lot of the employers that we currently engage with, currently use us as a provider, but also target companies. Is very much mail shots have been very, very proactive, and actually we've had with regular employer updates. We also run a levy event that Sue Husband from the SFA delivered the keynote speech on, and that was on the September the 6th, and that was probably one of the best events we've ever had attended. I think we had about 60 employers in the room for a breakfast event. So looking at doing that with your current employers, because you want to reinforce to your employers that currently use you as a training provider that you're providing them more than just a service as a training provider, but also as an opportunity to target new employers. I mean, I put this up because at our last Ofsted, our engineering and manufacturing department, we pride ourselves on the links with employers, industry trade bodies, steering groups, and we use them to really keep, we use them to really reinforce that kind of key relationship with organisations that becomes a partnership. And mentioned previously about our key growth sectors, and they very much are within our region: advanced manufacturing, high-speed rail, food and drink, and construction. And that's really what Birmingham Metropolitan's approach has been. Okay. I think questions are going to be at the end.
Yeah, we'll pause for general questions in just a few minutes, Mike. Thank you very much for that. So right now I'm going to hand back control of the presentation to Gary. And I'm going to open up James's mic because I know that one works.
How's that? All good? Excellent. Thank you, Neil, and thank you, David and Mike. That was, yeah, I think you illustrated perfectly the opportunities there, and particularly strategies around engaging with those opportunities. And I think, Mike, to have you kind of illustrate that in the context of you've been doing it now for quite some time is fantastic. Just to finish off on responding to the opportunities, and really just to pose some questions and some things to what we call things to think about, really. Particularly, and these are relevant whether you are currently engaged and growing your engagement, or whether you are looking at how you are going to respond to the opportunities that the new standards and new assessment plans present. So just to highlight a few of these, so really, we touched on this earlier, actually how revolutionary is the assessment for the new apprenticeship standards? What do you have in your offering which has the potential to support both on programme but also endpoint assessment as well? This notion of standardisation is critical, particularly in the context of the outcome for the learner and the outcome from the employer. So where individuals are on the apprenticeships on the same standard but through multiple providers, or rather multiple providers are delivering the same standards to different cohorts of learners, it's really this notion of ensuring that through the quality models, through standardisation, that those learners are coming out of the programme with like-for-like outcomes to their benefit, but also to the benefit of their employer, but particularly future employers, because they will transition, they will progress into new opportunities in employer and within new employers as well, outside of those that they did their original apprenticeship with. So that really allows us to think about, really pose this question around the learner. What is the learner gaining from this offer, from the partnerships that you are building and you will build with employers, from potentially with other delivery partners to support the quality and the comparability and the transferability of these programs. And that does lead into your business model. So what work are you doing now, have you been doing to evolve and define your business model to respond to these needs? How are you using local labour market insight in a way that Mike described so clearly? How is that helping you to evolve or to develop your growth sectors and your priority sectors, an institute or as a private training provider? And how will you use that to react, particularly in terms of the ability to respond to local needs in the way that Mike defined, and the importance of that employee partnership to enable you to respond, because you will end up with different delivery models for these standards, and it's critical that that's defined locally with your employer partners. And then finally, a couple more things to think about, really. So there are opportunities here when it comes to both the delivery model and and your own proposition. So where might you partner with in a shared delivery style model, where you are bringing in the expertise of your colleagues, your partners in your region, whether colleges or other private training providers that you could potentially work with, to support and deliver bits of the apprenticeships. How are you identifying and articulating your proposition? How does that align to the standards? How does that align to local needs, local growth areas, local opportunities as described by the employers? And how do you articulate that to your employers locally? Mike's described a number of strategies that Birmingham and Met has used to engage with local employers, from running events to getting out there on the ground and meeting with them and developing that proposition with them, but then articulating it as well. And ultimately, what that leads to is what can you offer? How can you promote what you offer as being the ability to deliver those standards effectively, and potentially endpoint assessment as well. So just a few things to think about, a few pointers really, and as we move into the final slides.
Thanks, James. So I just want to finish off really, don't worry, we're not going to bombard you with loads of Pearson information. I actually just wanted to finish off with this slide, which is an example of how the customer service practitioner standard is going to work. And I guess as food for thought, finishing off today, and Neil said the slides will be available, is where does your offer, or where could your offer sit within this? It clearly shows where the on-program learning is, what is involved. You've got the wraparound there of English and maths, and then you've got that gateway that I talked about earlier in the endpoint assessment. So as a takeaway from today, you know, maybe use this slide to have a think about if customer service is something that you're going to offer, or even if it's not, just using it as an example. You know, it's a good way to perhaps start to think about where your provision slots in, where your employee engagement obviously starts and where it continues, etc. From a Pearson perspective, of course, though, customer service and a lot of other standards, we're doing a lot of work at the moment putting our offer and our proposition into place, and there's a lot more information on that on our website and coming soon, and has been covered. This particular example has been covered in quite a bit more detail in the second webinar in the series, so do drop in and have a look at that and hear what my colleague Cheryl Woods, who's far better placed to talk about that than I, had to say about that. So Neil, that's all from James and I. We're happy to take questions, obviously, with Mike and David as well.
Okay, thanks very much, Gary. So we do have a couple of questions that come in. This may involve a little bit of mic juggling, but I'm going to open up Mike's mic, and I'm going to open up David's mic, and when I'm not talking, I will open up James's mic. So the first question that's come in was directed at Mike Townsend, but then also I suppose it's also a general question to see what others' take on this is. Mike, the question that's come in your few slides, you referred to delivery partners rather than subcontractors. How would you define the difference between those?
Well, I think when you look at subcontractors, when we look at subcontract, a partner in regard to a subcontract, we are essentially just a funding mechanism. When you look at it as a delivery partner, there are, you know, you and your partner are delivering on the same apprenticeship program. So actually, you are actually contracting out part of the apprenticeship delivery, not like subcontract when you pretty much subcontract out the entire delivery and then take 20% for being a funding body for that partner. So it very much is regarding shared delivery partnership.
Okay, so do any of the other presenters want to add to that? Okay. Any further questions from the audience at this point?
To answer the question.
So to the original question, does that answer your question? And the original question is no doubt furiously typing a nuanced answer. Yes, it does. Okay. Says someone who'd also asked the same question. Yes, and the original questioner has also confirmed that answers the question. So we have an opportunity for you to ask any more questions now. We've got a few minutes remaining. Thank you for attending today's event, ladies and gentlemen. This is actually the last scheduled event in this series, although I very much hope it's not the last, particularly as I have a PDR objective to run 8 of these by the end of the year. So there will, I hope, be at least 4 more of these, and you can actually influence what those are. You can follow us and converse with us over our Twitter handle, which is @BTEC on LinkedIn, currently still down as Pearson Work-Based Learning in Colleges. Our Insight newsletter, which you can subscribe to, and indeed on our Insight blog on the Pearson UK website. And as I said, there will be future Insight webinars, and we will probably be sending out a survey quite shortly in order to ascertain what those events most need to be. So we're going to stay on the line for a little while everyone files out. So if you do have any questions, just think of it as like the end of a physical event where you can go up to the presenter and ask them personally something that you didn't want to put your hand up about during the event. But if that is all that we see of you tonight, then thank you very much for attending, and I bid you a good evening.